Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. Okay, I haven't attached the other side yet over here. Just kind of laying things up. And one thing I thought about, remember I mentioned that these vertical pieces of acrylic, that you should mount them right at the edge. Yes, that's definitely still what I would do initially. But this gantry seems to have about, a little less than 1/4 of an inch of gap. As you can see, I can move it back and forth. And you don't want to be clamping this, because that's going to pull these two pieces together. It's going to make the wheels bind. So this needs to be spot on fit, just right. So what I'm going to do is I'm continuing the process, and when I get to the point where I'm going to attach this, I'm going to loosen one side and make adjustments until it fits properly, and I don't have to pull these two pieces toward each other with the bolts as this gets anchored in place. So at this point, I'm putting in the PCB board. You have two plastic pieces, at least this kit. I've seen photos that have differently shaped pieces. This is the base. This is the top. You want to orient this so that the large cutout at the end is over this piece right here, allowing for the vertical connection, and the hole is over this push switch. Okay, and so that, yeah, there's no other way that can work. So you want to assemble this assortment of hardware here. You're going to need there's basically two sets of these M3s. There's, I believe this is a 12, and I believe these are an 8. Regardless, you need 4 of each. The longer ones are going to go through the base plate from below, and this had a piece of paper on it. I'm going to go ahead and put it shiny side up, and then you have 4 of these small spacers. That kit actually comes with extras of just about everything. There were a couple extra barrel connectors. There's extra screws in case you lose stuff during assembly, which again makes me question why they didn't use replace certain pieces with better quality hardware, add things like washers. If they could afford to throw in as much extra hardware as they could have provided exact quantities and used the cost differential to provide, washers and stuff like that. Anyway, I keep going back to that. So the way it's going to go is long screw from below, plastic spacer, PCB board, standoff, anchor those down, okay? Top plate, and then shorter screws. So I'm going to go ahead and put this together. Okay, now to mount the board, put a pair of slide nuts in. You can just run them in from one side. And I would recommend doing one side at a time. It's kind of silly, of course you have to, but you don't want to have to, you want the slide nuts out to either side. Makes them easier to get started. See, if the slide nut was further in, I'd have a hard time getting it into position. Now, since this is slotted, I'm going to go ahead and put this at its extremes. That way it's off the work area as much as possible. Now, conceivably, you could mount this vertically on the side here. I saw someone do that. The problem is with the feet, they had done things, assembled this section differently, and there was more room underneath here. I questioned the way that was done, but I think the best position is like this here. Your cords all come out and go around the side of the work area. So once I tighten this down, I'm going to put on the opposite to this bar on the other side, and then I'm going to make my left to right adjustment to fit the gantry. Okay, this is where it gets fun. I'm saying that facetiously. Let's see. The wiring is the thing that, strangely enough, has the least amount of information available. The so-called instructions have almost zero, literally. They have a couple pictures of a couple of the plugs, no description on where things go, how things connect, etc. And the majority, in fact, all but one YouTube video I watched talked at all about connecting the wires. It's like after people have gotten this far into the project, they're so fed up with dealing with the lack of instructions that they just, power through and stop recording or something. I don't know. In any event, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you full information. I'm going to cover this in as much detail as I can. This is going to be a little simplistic at the moment because I'm figuring things out. So let's start with attaching the laser. This aluminum block has a small ridge on either side here, so it doesn't go in like this. You lower it in from above. There's these grooves here on all four corners that are part of the assembly. Screws thread into those, probably self-tapping variety. In any event, you lower this in like so. Now, I'm not going to worry about specific height at the moment. I'm just going to snug these little thumb screws down just so this doesn't move around on us. And I'll worry about exact position later. Now there are 4 main wires. And that makes sense because we have 3 stepper motors and we have to provide power to the laser. So that's 4. So let's start by looking at the ones with the motor plugs. Okay, that's the power to the laser. The power to the laser cord has 2 identical connectors. Simple enough. And so that's going to plug in here. They're pretty much idiot-proof. You've got the 2 little edge things here, and those plug into the 2 slots. So that's the power cord, and that's going to plug into one of these 2 ports down here of the same pin count. Problem is, it doesn't tell you which, so I'll cross that bridge as I go. Then we have our motor plugs. Now, the motor plugs have 2 different ends. So you have this type of pin out. These go to the motors. And then we have one shorter cable and the 2 longer ones. That should also be relatively self-explanatory. Did I do that upside down? I think I did. Let's see here. I think I showed you 2 of one and 1 of the other. I did. Okay, so these are our motor plugs. Okay, and at the opposite end, we have this type of connector. So let's go ahead and plug the short one into our motor. Now you'll notice that I switched this motor position. I set this so the wires are vertical. Okay, so I will probably bundle these 2 cables together with some of this I'm not sure exactly what this is called. It's just a plastic wrap for wires. And then we have the two longer wires. Okay, so these are the two motor ends. Oops. Okay, and I go ahead and plug those in. Now, depending on how closely you're studying this video, you may have noticed that I've changed something since the last segment. And that is the mounting of the board. If you pull the gantry all the way back and you look down the laser was actually, when this was mounted more centrally on the arm, the laser had the potential to shine onto the plastic here. And I didn't want that. I wanted the work area to be as large as possible. And so I took two longer M5 screws, and I had a couple of plastic barrels that were, oops, God, I'm just throwing stuff around, a little bigger around than these, about double the thickness, and about 50% taller, so about that. And I got a couple of washers out and anchored this through the holes here on the opposite side of the plastic strip. So that moves the control to the edge and out of the way of the laser. So now, where to connect these? Well, we've got three connectors that have the same type as the motor, and thankfully, this is an EleksMaker board. The company that builds this kit, they actually make the laser, they make the card, they make their name is on the motors as well. I doubt they're just branding it, they probably make these. In any event, they put the axes on here. So we have Y1 axis, Y2 axis, and X axis. So, you know, common sense says we have two motors on one side. Forward and back here is obviously our Y dimension, and the left and right is our X. So this cord is going to plug in here. Now, everyone who assembles these complains about the wiring harness. And, you know, when you've got multiple motors that are moving around, there's just no elegant solution for this. I'm going to go ahead and plug this one into the next closest connector of the correct type. Again, as I mentioned, there's two of these. It's basically positive, ground, and signal. So now there's the question of Y1 and Y2, which motor to connect. And I was looking at the layout for the software, and there is a in the configuration, there are checkboxes to flip or invert the XY direction. So I'm guessing that may be one of the reasons for that, so that you can adjust that. So worst case scenario, I have these wrong and I'm going to have to switch. But the software has to be smart enough to know that you've got two motors that are facing each other. So this one turns the opposite direction of that one to make the bar move. Okay, so that's basically the connections. Now, with the bar all the way back, and I'm not sure, let me see if I can't adjust the camera here. Hang on one moment. Okay, so with the gantry moved as far away from the board as possible, we still have a decent amount of slack. So I'm probably going to be anchoring these wires along here somewhere, and then rig out. I'm still seriously considering the whip antenna idea, basically putting a piece of music wire attached to one of the bolts down here, and just attach the wire to that so that as the gantry moves, the wire can just stay up and out of the way. That way it doesn't run the risk of dropping and it's not caught up along the sides. So, because if you watch the remember earlier in the video, I talked about building a box that this is going to sit in with a lid, and it's going to be sealed and have a fan or two drawing air out of it. So this one, thanks to this cabling, or this cable tying, this is going to make this a little stiffer, but I don't want, I want to make sure I've got strain relief. If you know what that term means, strain relief means that at connections like this, the wires aren't pulled up hard against the connector, where it's going to potentially crimp over time and fatigue. So I'm going to want to make sure that these are bent, and one way to do that is attaching them together like this, equidistant from each other. And another thing would be to, as I was mentioning that the whip antenna kind of thing, probably just have a piece of wire that comes out from here and just attach here at the end of the music wire, and that way this can traverse back and forth like that. So I'm going to start tinkering with that process and downloading software and getting ready, starting to get this set up and programmed, and I will go into all of that in detail. I hope you're getting good information out of this. If you're building one of these, I hope this is solid and helping you. This is probably a good point where I will move on to the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.